right, thank you everyone for joining us this evening, and welcome to MOCA North Miami. My name is Akila Child. I'm the Director of Communications here, and I just wanted to thank you all for joining us for this lovely evening and panel discussion. And thank you for the students for coming earlier and having a lovely tour with Jamia. It's really nice to have everyone in the space. And just wanted to get started and talk through with the backdrop of this beautiful work by Jamia Richmond Edwards, and take you through the evolution of from student to professional artist, and also examining the legacy of Afro-Cobra. And they'll talk a little bit about this throughout the conversation. And Afro-Cobra is a little near and dear to us here at MOCA as well. In 2018, we had the pleasure of having a presentation, or presenting the exhibition Afro-Cobra Messages to the People, which had the privilege of moving on to be shown at the Venice Biennale. And it's showcased works, or Afro-Cobra showcased works from some of the artists from Howard who influenced Jamia's work in the show. But before we get into the introductions of our panelists here, I wanted to express our gratitude to our partners from Howard University's Chadwick A. Boseman College of Fine Arts, including Dean Felicia Rashad, Assistant Dean Dee Saunders-Thompson, who is here on our panel, Professor Jacoby DuBois, and Associate Professor Alex McSwain for your vision and what we hope will be a long-lasting partnership with MOCA and Howard. And while Roxanne Caesar couldn't be here due to some travel issues, I'd like to extend a big thank you to her and to Dr. Allison Bryant from Howard's Office of Corporate Relations for working with Adize and I to help make this event happen this evening. And I know we have some board members, MOCA trustees, and some Howard alumni here as well, so thank you all for joining us. So right before we get into the discussion, I just want to give a quick introduction of who our panelists are. So Adize Wilford, she's our curator here at MOCA, and she leads the curatorial department's dynamic program of exhibitions that highlight historically underexplored artists and movements. Adize previously held curatorial positions at the Studio Museum in Harlem, MoMA, and the Shed in New York, where she organized Howardina Pindell's survey exhibition and monographed, and a number of other exhibitions at the Shed, and has contributed to a number of exhibition catalogs, including Fictions, Black Refactions, and Young, Gifted, and Black. And of course, there's the exhibition catalog for Ancient Future as well in the shop. And the artist, Jamia Richmond Edwards, was born and raised in Detroit. She graduated from Jackson State University with a BFA, and went on to earn an MFA from Howard University in 2012, and has exhibited her artwork nationally and internationally, including at the Brooklyn Museum, the Delaware Art Museum, California African American Museum, Charles Wright Museum, and Kravitz-Waby Gallery. And Jamia is a 2018 recipient of the Joan Mitchell Foundation Painters and Sculptors Grant. And at the end here, we have Dean Denise Saunders-Thompson, who is the Assistant Dean of Administration at Howard University's Chadwick A. Boseman College of Fine Arts, has over 2 decades of experience in leadership and arts administration. In 2021, she was presented with the National Medal of Arts by President Biden on behalf of the International Association of Blacks in Dance. She's also curated significant performances at the John F. Kennedy Center for Performing Arts, among many other notable things that in a very long, lengthy, and impressive bio. And we also have our Associate Professor Alexander McSwain from Howard University as well, who works in electronics studio, graphic design, photography, and among other subjects, and has commitment that extends beyond academia into nonprofit work, contributing to environmental education and social change initiatives such as Shaw Eco Village and Men Can Stop Rape organization. And with that, we'll get started. Thank you very much for being here today, and I will pass it over to Adize to lead the conversation.
Well, thank you all for being here. We know it's quite a busy week and everyone is pulled from the beach and all over, so I appreciate you coming and braving what is sometimes gnarly traffic to get to the mainland and to spend some time with us in this exhibition. I'm really, really privileged and proud to have one of the first shows that I've put on at MOCA in my tenure that was really solely something that I considered not something that I had to take over from existing projects be the work of Jamia Richmond Edwards. It was really meaningful and important for me for that to be the case. And it's been a really wonderful opportunity for growth for the both of us. I think we both very much felt like we wanted this show to show an expression of someone's practice at a really critical moment. And so I hope when you spend time in the exhibition, you can see her pushing her work in quite tremendous ways. But I wanted to start actually with this conversation about Black spaces because so much of Jamia's practice has been influenced by her time in what I consider Black meccas in the United States, being born and raised in Detroit, spending time at Jackson, and then going to the DMV area. It just has a real impact on the way that she's moved through life, and we've had wonderful conversations in the studio about style, about the way you carry yourself, about portals of imagination being unlocked because of the representation that you see, people being business people, owning restaurants, moving in certain ways, and how that allowed her to have a really, I would say, expanded confidence moving through the world, and that is represented in the work. So I want to pose that to the panelists. If we can just spend a little bit of time starting our conversation meditating on the importance of Black spaces.
Hello, test. Thank you everyone for coming out. Really appreciative and have much gratitude for you all being with us here this evening. So I came from Detroit, and at the time, there was Mayor Dennis Archer, and Dennis Archer was stemming from the legacy of Coleman A. Young, who was a mayor in Detroit, a very controversial mayor. Detroit is a very historically bliggity Black city, and so when I went to school down south, there was this sort of idea, or I had this preconceived notion that there was I don't know, you know how people look at the South as being slower, but no, that's definitely wasn't the case. So coming from Detroit, which is like, I would call it like a big baller, high rollers type of city, the South, going down to Mississippi, Jackson State, where I attended undergrad, I just learned about like gratitude and Southern hospitality. I remember getting offended when someone saw me. They didn't know me and they spoke to me, and I'm like, why are you speaking to me? You know what I mean? Just that kind of ignorance that you have not growing up in, the South. So then leaving Mississippi, going to the DMV area, and Howard, that was the first time I had heard conversations of like Black legacy. You know what I mean? Like people using words like legacy and very like scholars, you know what I mean? So going from Detroit to Jackson and then to the DC area, each city kind of built me up. I picked up different attributes from it. And I think that, it's not that I think, I know that, and I'm being intentional about speaking in terms of knowing versus think, but I know that all of those places informed me to move unapologetically, and unapologetically for me means to imagine without borders. I had heard a conversation on social media a few weeks ago, was that, can you imagine your world if you didn't have any sort of blockers? What does that look like? Like, what does that existence look like? And I was just like, over the past few years, that's been my daily meditation. Those are my prayers of like, how far can I fly, or how weird can I be? And essentially, it's opened up, those Black spaces has literally opened up a portal to ancient future, which I think is really prolific, because ancient future is the snake eating its tail. It's like infinity, right? So and just having the space, having the ability and the privilege of being in spaces where Black people are able to be, and not having to bridle yourself. So that's how that's informed me.
Good evening. Alex McSwain. So for me, I guess I've been spoiled because I was born and raised in the Chocolate City in the 80s and 90s. Then I went to Howard University, CU. So that kind of afforded me the ability to travel around the country and the world at times. And you realize that when you go out in the world, outside HBCU, that is, there in working certain industries, there is not a lot of us in these spaces. So coming back home, to Howard and living my DC at home, it kind of makes you appreciate being from a city where it's such rich in culture. The 80s and 90s and really early 2000s, because the 2000s when gentrification started creeping into DC. So now, you go, it's more like a MOCA, more like a caramel chocolate city now. So it's, so that shift has changed over the past 20 years. So for me, DC still has its hubs of, Black excellence, and Howard is the beacon of it. So for me, it's about coming home, but then also being able to travel to bring the knowledge we have of the legacy of the Black family with you every place you go. Because in the animation industry, as you know, or really Hollywood, it wasn't until recent where you see us on the screen in a big and powerful way, especially thanks to Chadwick Boseman. So for me, it's about trying to maintain that legacy, but also keep on venturing out, because there is going to be a company where it's none of us there. I mean, one or two of us there, but then at Howard, we're able to nurture those students to be able to branch out like branches of a tree to make the roots grow. So.
Well, during the pandemic, we all know we were at home, and of course, the internet was on fire. And a saying that really resonated, that came out during COVID-19, was that this world does not move without Black creativity. This world does not move without Black creativity. Yet at the same time, the spaces that laud Black creativity keep us from being recognized and acknowledged. So creating Black space here in Miami, Florida, as part of Art Basel is critical. Your work here is critical because this world does not move without Black creativity. Art's foundation is rooted in the Black experience, in Black culture. We move it, we create it, and so it's important that the spaces, whether they be Black or white, acknowledge and have our stories, our information, our creativity present at all times. Bison at Basel makes a statement about Black people taking back a space that was actually birthed on the backs of our ancestors. So I will say again, this world does not move without Black creativity.
Just building off of that, I think that there's also something really important about levels of opacity in the work, where it's very much about if you know, you know. If you're a part of the culture, there are certain things that you immediately have resonance with. And we had conversations in the studio about how far to take the knowledge. And we both decided, in certain regards, there are things that are for our culture that can be consumed and understood. And there are things that we want to share and make public. And then there are things that are fine to not have an entry point. It's okay to come into a space and not understand every single thing that you see. And that being a political statement and that being a deliberate choice. But I also think that there are some incredible symbols that you've been reimagining and rethinking and bringing new meaning to through this world building that you're making. And I'd love for you to talk about some of the symbols that you do want to share and things that have been a motif throughout the work, even some earlier work, which we really wanted to show the breadth of Jamia's practice. So we have works from 2018 and 2019 on view. Majority of the work were commissioned specifically for this exhibition and really show this moment in your practice after the pandemic where you really leaned into this new style of production that, while it has the roots of what you were doing in the past, really catapults you into this new moment. So I'd love for you to talk about some symbols.
Yes, so over the past 5 years, well, no, let me rewind. So my dissertation for my MFA at Howard University was called Medusa as an Archetype. And I was really inspired by Medusa because I grew up in the 80s and I was born in 82, so I experienced both the crack epidemic and the AIDS epidemic, which was catastrophic warfare, you know. And I witnessed it. Obviously, I didn't understand at the time. There was a generation in my family that was completely disrupted. And I had an aunt that passed. She was murdered in 2007. And it was a really grotesque murder, but she was a drug addict. And one of the things that the guys who murdered her, they really didn't, they looked at her as if she was nothing. And what, for me, her story reminded me of Medusa, because what a lot of people don't understand was Medusa was a goddess. And through how we're taught that she was this kind of ugly mother. And so I was really intrigued by that. Like, you know, let's unpack this idea of the ugly mother and really kind of deconstruct what this construct is. And so over the past several years, this serpent, this snake has been reappearing in my work. And what's happened is, as I began researching the serpent, I discovered all throughout the world, particularly here in the Americas, you find that motif. But simultaneously, there's this negative connotation of it, right? The serpent is what lured Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden. But another perspective is that the snake was the liberator, okay? So, so just steering from that, I discovered that we have all throughout the Americas globally, but a lot of my research is based here in the Americas. You have a lot of earthenworks, a lot of the indigenous pottery artifacts has these serpents, where in 2023, I come to the conclusion that this is this thread of the dragon. And so as I was speaking with a student earlier who asked me about this dragon and am I inspired by, you know, Asian culture? And I was like, yeah, not really. And so I moved to Detroit, back to Detroit, my hometown, after being away for 22 years. And I tell the story of being just obsessed with dragons, just drawing dragons, never had any interest in dragons. And as I started going downtown Detroit and really studying the architecture, I discovered that there's dragons throughout all of the architecture. Everywhere in Detroit is unicorns. I'm like, oh, snap. So what that did for me is it said, okay, usually when I thought about the dragon, I thought about the Chinese dragon, right? But now, me seeing that, now that brings about the Detroit dragon. And when you find that when you travel around the country and you find this Art Deco architecture, Roman Greco architecture, you see dragons. So that, to me, that gave me permission to contextualize what the dragon meant to me as a Black Detroiter, you know, as an indigenous woman. How do I want to contextualize that? So I began to utilize that motif to literally like use it as a frequency. And this dragon has taken me on many adventures. So it started off as Medusa and literally transformed into a dragon. And if you guys are familiar with like dragon mythos, dragons are the oldest, most powerful things in the universe, you know, and it's really interesting. So I'm like, okay, dragons remind me of Black people. There was this, it's interesting when you begin to study art history, there's a period of time where the dragon is being slayed. You will find that, right? And so what I look at it is putting these dragons into work. This means that this is the resurrection of the dragon. Y'all remember them? Well, a lot of you guys are young in here, but what's my Bruce Leroy? The Last Dragon. So it's like Jamia, aka Momiqua, aka Mimo, is the new dragon. So a lot of this work I've painted myself as the heroine of my story, but how does that story shape up when you have things like dragons and unicorns? It really opens up a whole other paradigm of adventure for Black folks that I had never really seen for myself. So that's how I used it.
And because we have a number of Howard students in the room, I think it was important for us to have some questions that really unpacked what it meant to your career and what it meant to have these spaces. And I want to talk about connectedness, because I think there is this myth of the artists working alone in the studio, toiling by themselves, having no communication, no connectedness with other colleagues, and that really is untrue. As a curator, while I do go to studio visits and talk to artists one-on-one, one of my favorite questions to ask an artist is, who are you looking at? Well, who's your favorite artist working right now? Who's an influence to you? Who is a friend that maybe I can go spend some time in their studio? And no one ever says, I'm alone in the studio and I don't talk to anyone. That's never, ever the answer. And I really would love for Dean Saunders-Thompson and Professor McSwain to talk about the importance of connectedness and how you have shaped the program in order to make sure that that is something that happens.
Well, this is year 2.5 for the reestablishment of the Chadwick A. Boseman College of Fine Arts. The College of Fine Arts was founded in 1960. And so this is, I guess you could say, a second life cycle in a way. And we have been very, very blessed to re-engage with not only our students, but the faculty. The faculty are the ones who are really responsible on the ground, in the trenches with our young people, bringing them their knowledge, their experiences, the tools and the resources to begin to create and shape their creative work. And so the importance of having really robust programs, but also people like Jamia, who are active in the field that they are currently teaching and actually learning, continuing to learn and study themselves and bringing them back to our students, keeps them really relevant, knowledgeable, experienced, and also an opportunity to apply. Professor McSwain is in the field working with other organizations and institutions and bringing his students along so they actually have the opportunity in real time to gain the theory in the classroom, but then apply it immediately in real practice. And so that's important for our students and the work that's created, particularly now with the way that technology, we won't go into the AI conversation today, but the way that technology has really begun to impact how our young people think and create. And so it really is about the college providing the best faculty, the best resources, the best tools for our young people to continue to create and make their work. And this person next to me is responsible, along with some others here in the room.
So for me, it's kind of a full circle moment. I have some of my professors, Professor Bartley and Professor Featherstone. They were my teachers when I was in college. Now I'm teaching alongside them, and then otherwise my students are here today. So for me, it was it's like I guess a paradigm shift where back when I was in school, we would spend late hours in the studio working. But then when I became a teacher, I kind of noticed a shift in the student body where they were just really come to class and then go, come to class and then go. But then now, with this group, they've kind of rekindled what I used to have when I was a student, where they were, working in the lab hours after class. So I'm not sure if that's, a correlation with me being a teacher now, because I've been teaching for about 12 years now. I've taught across 5 different universities, one other HBCU. So for me, it's about, bringing what I learned from them, morphing it into what modern, because, things change over the years. It's been a decade since I've been out of school. So, the things, what is required of our students now is dramatically different from when I graduated. And then I guarantee you in the next 5 years, it's going to be dramatically different from when they graduate, because they're all seniors and juniors now. So for us, it's about trying to remain relevant in the industry as well as the art world, because, animation going, more so going to motion graphics, motion picture, Hollywood versus versus going into a studio art where, you work in industry, you have to kind of not conform, but you're going into a machine that's already existing, but then also trying to bring you into those machines as being a Black artist. So.
I think we would be remiss to not talk about mentorship in this conversation, because one of the things that was just a no-brainer for us to bring the show to MOCA was your connection with the artists that are part of the collective of AfriCobra. And it was such a foundational show for us as an institution at a time where we were in the process of rebuilding. And to have those artists trust our institution to be a part of their legacy really meant something, and still does mean something. And so knowing that they had such an incredible hand in your practice, you were talking with the students about your use of color and how that was so deeply connected to your time at Howard. I'd love for you to talk about how mentorship through those particular professors really made a mark on you.
Absolutely. While I was a student at Howard, and we were at Howard at the same time, we were both in grad school together, just a fun fact. So while in school, I was also part of an organization called Black Artists of DC, which I believe they definitely are meeting still. So I had this very dichotomous educational upbringing, both institutional and one from artists who many were self-taught artists, and that is really important that you understand of, you have people who working in the system, and you also need people who working outside the system, okay? And the self-taught artists are really important because it really helped me to be comfortable with breaking the rules. And so, yeah, so coming into Black Artists of DC was very helpful in the mentorship. And then in undergrad, when I was 19 years old, I was taking an African American art class at Jackson State University. I discovered the work of Jeff Donaldson, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, this is the most amazing work that I've ever seen in my life. And I won the opportunity to do our residency with Murray DePillars, who was also a part of AfriCobra, who ended up dying. I'm sorry, that was harsh, passing away. Goodness. Soft words. And so fast forward, I attend Howard University. I'm studying up under the tutelage of Rhonda Kelly Anderson, who's still there, James Phillips, and Al Smith, who wasn't a part of AfriCobra, but he was a part of that group coming up. And they literally just kind of like, iron sharpens iron, And I, told them like, I just want to be the best that I can be. And I attended graduate school when I was like 27, so I was an older student. I have 3 sons. I had my first kid when I was 22, so I was a lot mature coming into the program, and I just knew like I have a job to do, and I need y'all to teach me everything that I need to learn. And it's been really exceptional. And what they taught me was the significance of, like, as you said, collectivity, and understanding that, using your peers, and more importantly, elders, okay? The elders. That's who I always gravitated towards, is like, give me the knowledge. And that in itself has literally opened up so many doors for me. So yeah, that Howard University, or that legacy of Jeff Donaldson. And one of the things that was really kind of knocked into my head at Howard under Dr. Everett was, we are scholar artists, Jamia. We are scholarly artists. And what that really taught me is that, even beyond calling myself an artist, I'm a scholar, I'm an intellectual, and the art is really like the byproduct of my investigations. So, yeah, that's my upbringing.
I love that idea, that art being a byproduct of all of the work that you do, and then it becomes realized on the wall in such a meaningful way. I want to talk about the film that we worked on together for this exhibition, because it has majorettes and it has a really important part of HBCU culture, but put in such a way that it's larger than life, it's in your face, the first time I went into the pyramid and watched, it felt like they were marching over you. It's just a really impactful installation. And so I'd love for you to talk about the importance of including that style of dance, but also the importance of the transition that you asked the dancers to kind of move into, and the directive that you gave them when we were in Atlanta.
Absolutely. So I want to push things back further, because how my brain works is, yes, I, appropriated or used elements of HBCU culture, but how my brain works is, where'd that come from? Because we didn't just pop up, high stepping like that. And you find processions. It's essentially processions. And if you think about HBCU culture, and we look at the stadium and you have the royal court, it's rooted, it's very Greek, it's very Roman, but even going back further, you find that across Africa, you find processions here, and you go back to ancient Mayan, Aztec civilizations, these processions exist. So what that tells me is that this is bigger than an HBCU marching band. This is something that I'm tapping to. This is cultural, this is a cultural, ancestral tool that I'm using for larger ideas. So yeah, I called my people. So I attended Jackson State University in undergrad, and I marched in the band. And one of the privileges of doing what I do and having this kind of access is working with geniuses. And I use the G word, I use it freely now, y'all. I know a lot of like real life geniuses, and even like the people on this panel, it's some genius there and some real specialness there that we have to acknowledge. But I called my friends that, who I attended Jackson State and who helped me put things together. So I called the choreographer, Janir Kidd, who marched to Jackson State with me. She was one of the dancers on Drumline. She has some really deep legacy in majorette culture. And with the video, the conceptual framework was that I wanted these young ladies to evoke the spirit of dragons dancing in the cosmos. To me, and if you kind of look into history, the cosmos has a very feminine energy, and so I thought that it was really appropriate to use them. And even in their youthfulness, because these are young ladies, ages 14, 15, 16, I just was so inspired by, I'm gonna say the word femininity, you know what I mean? Just the fluidity and youthfulness and pureness in terms of their movements to bring this to life. And, when I was tasked with this opportunity, I'm like, I gotta bring all of my toolbox, and I want this to be an experience, a feeling. And, the HBCU music marching culture, again, that's just one element of it, but this is ancient. And so me utilizing that to imagine this future, how can we use processions and majorette cultures in shaping Afrofuturism? How is that part of the conversation? And, that's what I'm unpacking.
But to me, I want to bring to your attention, when you were just talking about procession and ancestry, you're talking about going back home, African roots, movement, dance. You landed in my world for a moment.
Okay, come on.
You landed in my world for a moment.
Yes.
And so, you think about the rhythms, the beats, the movement. Your work moves. There's movement that comes through all of your work in the early stages and in the current stage. So that goes back to your artist scholarly work and the research, and it's natural, it's in the DNA, and it comes out in what we see.
Yes.
So it's there, all of it.
Absolutely.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
I received it.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask this final question before we open to the public and just talk about the evolution of the program, because I think, Dean Saunders Thompson, you talked about it briefly, but I really want to explore that a little bit more, because even in the short amount of time between when you received your MFA to where we are now, there's been tremendous change at the university. And so I'd love to give you the opportunity to speak to that.
Sure. I mentioned that the college is in its second life cycle. When I was a student, when Dean Rashad was a student, we were a large college, 750 students. All departments were accredited at the time. And a decision was made by our Board of Trustees to, what was the word we were using? Assume, thank you, assume. Assume the college into, at that time, the College of Liberal Arts, and it then became the College of Arts and Sciences. But when you're assumed, it's also a form of oppression. It's also a form of stifling. And all of the robust programming, much of the population of students was reduced. Our voice was diminished and reduced. That was for 20-something years. So literally just 2.5 years ago, life. And that life was brought back to us by a conversation that started with Chadwick A. Boseman and, at the time, President Wayne A.I. Frederick. And so we have, in the last 2.5 years, now become a college entity that is operating independently of the College of Arts and Sciences. We are managing our own budget. We are, we are again increasing the number of faculty and staff. We're building infrastructure. We are investing in our programs, our students, our professional affiliations. We are sitting here with you. We're here in Miami, Florida for a second time at Art Basel with twice the students that we came with last year. We are growing, we are developing, we are shaping, we are molding the next generation of artists.
I think that's a wonderful note to end on, because well, not end, but end our conversation, and then we'll open to the public, because I'm quite thrilled to see what the next generation will do and who will be in this room in 10, 15 years. You never know. So if there are any questions in the audience, if you could just shoot your hand up and we can give you a mic and have your question answered.
Good evening. Hi, Jamia. My name is Lauren Davidson. I'm an independent curator in DC. So I'm extremely excited to be here for your talk. But I had a question just going back to what you were saying about the evolution of your dragons. And you started with Medusa, and that sort of evolved into the dragon figure. And in that, I almost feel as though there was a power struggle or a power shift, because I see more power in the dragon, even the way you described it, versus the character or the goddess of Medusa. She had definite flaws, as we all know. So I just wonder if that was a part of your thinking, and perhaps you can kind of expound upon that.
Thank you for that question. If you look at my work, and I think, and I will argue with any artist, is really an evolution of my consciousness and understanding who and what I am. Because, you know, as I stated earlier. Maybe it's kind of a blur, but when I thought of Medusa or any type of snake or serpentine figure, there was a negative connotation. And I think that's kind of allegorical to how I feel as a Negro here in America. You know, it's a lot of things that we have to reckon with in terms of stepping into, and I'm not gonna say but my power that I had to go through. And a lot of that was rooted for me is, one, you have the historical elements, but also through my investigation in genealogy, which to me kind of began to unlock that sense of knowing versus if you look at my earlier works, the works are in their grayscale. And as you look at more recent works, they are more robust, they're colorful, they have a lot more movements versus they were very like statuesque. And to me, that's, again, allegorical to me feeling that sense of like, you know, just not understanding what this is. You know what I mean? This, my family story, and keep in mind, I'm working through trauma from the 80s. You know what I mean? And everything that, you know, everything that's thrown at us from propaganda on television, et cetera. So when you see the resurrection of the dragon, you're witnessing the resurrection of my courage, my gumption, my, you know, me turning 40 and me being a lot more unapologetic in terms of who I am, and even being, you know, understanding my indigenous American historical roots and being comfortable with pulling elements of American history within my work, which speaks to a sense of nationality that I think that a lot of my peers, I don't like to speak for everybody else, that I've struggled with my quote unquote American is. So yeah, that's literally what this dragon is a representation of, because art is, all of you're watching is just, you're witnessing me kind of work through the subconscious mind and kind of just figuring out where, so you see me being very statuesque in earlier works, being very rigid, grayscale, to me riding on dragons. That's a lot. You know what I mean? Yes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Skylar Henry. I am a senior painting major from Chicago, Illinois at Howard University. My question is, you talk a lot about an evolution in your art and in your style and the way that you express yourself through your art. What kind of advice can you give to us as young artists in aiding our evolution of our style and our work and executing that vision that we have?
So it's a few things. One, talk to the elders in your family. Look through the family, scrapbooks and albums. That's first and foremost. One of the things, because I was in education for 13 years, one of the things that was really fascinating, and also at the time when I was at Howard, where, you know, when we think of colors, a lot of times it was like, well, if I'm using the color red, how does Africans and this other culture use the color red? How does the Akan use red? And my thing was like, well, how do they use red on the block? What was red, or how do colors, how are they used within our culture? And oftentimes how we're kind of raised to kind of ignore Black American culture, while simultaneously we're watching the world adapt elements of our culture, right? So I just want to make sure that you all have agency to take hold of to take the lead and affirm yourself in our culture, right? Because it's exported daily, especially with social media. So between that and what I just moved back to Detroit 2 years ago after being away from it for 22 years. And I moved back like, ooh, this is a whole new world. Like, Detroit is amazing versus, you know, when you move away, you like, oh, that town is so dirty and ghetto and, you know, whatever. But then I go back to my city and I see non-Black folks wearing the what up though, the things that we coined within the culture. And I'm just like, wait a minute, let me reevaluate this. And so go to your hometowns, look at it, take ownership of it, because it's oftentimes where when you're in college, you are an implant. A lot of us who travel outside of the city or state that we go to school for, but I want to encourage you, go back to them hometowns, even if they in the country, even if grandma was raised in the deep south or wherever, and to like really learn the geography of that area. And when I mean by the geography, I'm talking about how magical this globe is and like really tapping into the magic of it. And so, and I'll give you an example. For instance, when we talk about Florida, there's this kind of like, oh, the politics kind of clouds the conversations, but Florida was known as like the Garden of Eden, like Eden in ancient books. There's a whole indigenous historical element. It's all type of pyramids and all type of literal magic within every place on this planet. And oftentimes we're taught to overlook while simultaneously you're seeing people move in and benefit off of these ancient historical markers. So what I'm telling you guys is to study your family, which is studying yourself, and study the geography that you came from. Because if you notice, people from Detroit have a certain frequency, my New Yorkers have a certain frequency, and that's really kind of reflecting the frequency of Mother Earth. Mother Earth, the different areas that she has is a certain pressure points or vibes, or so don't. Yes, explore the world, explore all cultures, but first start with yourself. So. I think we'll do one more question.
Hi, my name is Brighton Gant. I'm a senior animation interactive media major at Howard University, and I'm from Snellville, Georgia. I feel like Skylar asked a similar question I was going to ask. I was going to ask what you wanted to see from this new generation of artists. So. But I guess I can shift more into the fashion because I also see that in your work a lot. So I guess, can you speak more to how that shows up in your artwork?
And I want to ask the first part of your question. What do I want to see from the younger artists? Just keep disrupting. You know, like, I'm young, but I'm getting 40. Y'all the young folks, y'all got to disrupt, show up. And if you don't like the
40
rules,
is not old. Stop that.
it's not. But when I was 21, I thought 40 was old.
Journey. It's just a different part of the journey.
But I also want to speak to age, because there's also a thing within the culture that shames, you know, becoming an elder. Like, no, we got to disrupt that as well. But as young artists, disrupt. And if you all don't like, just imagine looking at my work. It's neon, pink, and green. These are coming in museums. I would have never, like, you couldn't even imagine that, 5 or 10 years ago. So disrupt, just continue. I understand that this exhibition is just an idea that I expect you guys to take to the next level. You know what I'm saying? Like the goal is for you all to exceed me. Like you all should do, and that's the thing about this show. And I had mentioned to somebody, like, while the world is literally imploding on itself, Black people are getting faster. We're jumping higher. We're becoming more creative. You see what I'm saying? So just keep shining. In terms of the fashion components, that's just me being a futurist and, coming from where I come from, which, obviously is the Motown, is just a very flamboyant sort of city. And I want us to be in a space where we are comfortable with wearing a Kool-Aid, dyed hair, and showing up in sequence and in our beauty, and also embracing our natural beauty. And I even mentioned to someone earlier with my earlier works, I was just twisting my hair because I was literally ashamed of my finer hair texture and my hair being red, me being a redhead and a freckle. Like, I would hide those things. And now you see the work you're seeing me become more comfortable with who I am, and as future artists and creatives, I want to see yourselves in the work. One of the things that I had the habit of doing in the work, and it's nothing wrong with it, it's just whatever your vibe is, right? But I would make myself a lot darker in my paintings. But it's like the world needs to see copper colored, freckle face, you know what I'm saying, big eye girls in the work. And oftentimes you have other extremes where we change our features to feed another construct, an ideal. And I find a lot of Black girls in particular being shamed for that. And I've been shamed for sometimes, like, you know, wanted to wear mini skirts, and like that's part of the like, have y'all seen the 60s? Like, we was wearing them, you know, we were dressing real provocative. So I'm really interested in fashion and what that progression looks like, and I'm also a designer as well, so that's something that you guys should be looking out for, is my clothing line that I've been working on. I can't tell y'all yet. Still working on those trademarks. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
So one more question? Okay. Okay, we'll do that.
Thank you very much. I just want to thank you both. I think this is amazing. The future is Black. It's fantastic. It's fabulous. I'm a literature professor at FIU, and Jamia, as I was listening to you talk about the evolution of your concept of Medea to the dragon, it reminds me of a Black British poet, Dorothea Smart, who has this idea in her poetry book. First poetry book is called Connecting Medium, and she talks about Medea being a dreadlock sister who's just misunderstood. They thought the locks were snakes, and they misunderstood her because she's a strong Black woman. They thought she was angry and aggressive and problematic, but she was really just being herself. They just didn't understand. So I really love your evolution. I love what you've done with that concept, because there are others who have taken it up and are dealing with it. And that brings me to my question for both of you. What, if any, are your literary influences?
Well, to be honest, like I read dissertations, like PhD dissertations on history, and I'm in deep 19th, 18th, 17th century history. But one of my, in terms of literature, I look at Jay Electronica. I look at Kanye West, you know what I'm saying? And what I realize in terms of pop culture, because I always wonder, like, well, what happened to the philosophers and the poets and all of that? And I'm like, they became hip hop artists. They became rappers. I mean, seriously. And one of my favorite lines is from Drake in literature, where he says, you know it's real when you are when you think you are. You know it's real when you are who you think you are. You know, like, that's actually really prolific. So I've like Killer Mike, he has this album that he came out this past summer with, and I'm just was like really inspired. So I don't want us to kind of, for my generation, I have to bring in the hip hop culture, because that's really essential. It's some really important writing that's going on. And it's also a lot of bastardization that's going on within that genre. But when I think in terms of history, philosophy, rap, Phoenicians, history, language, wordsmiths, it's still connected. So that's who I'm listening to, and particularly Jay Electronica, A Written Testimony. I listen to it daily. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I had one more question. So for me, we were students together.
Yes.
Won't say what year, but, you know, back then. I barely remember. So for me, I barely remember my thesis, let alone your thesis. So just thinking about not necessarily the evolution, but the journey. 'Cause I know a lot of our students may need to hear that in terms of practicality and scale, because, you know, these are, you know, massive. And I know, you know, you may have started big, but maybe not this big. So just thinking of those struggles between going from where you were back then to where you are now, to be able to have, several, literally floor to ceiling pieces in the gallery. Like, what was the, when was that turning point where it's critical? I need to go big to convey my message.
I got you. So for one, you gotta crawl before you walk. But when we're talking about art practice, for one, we thinking from a very Western lens in terms of like, how large was your first painting, on the wall? Are you working on the floor? But I want to push back and say, you really start seeing your first art in terms of how your mother decorated the interior. When you go by your grandma's house, you know what I'm saying? Or you go to, the local black bookstore in the community, and those are installations that in itself, even when I'm thinking of color theory, just to sidetrack a little bit, instead of looking at a book, go look at Soul Train. You know what I'm saying? Like, study the culture, and you're gonna find everything that you're looking for. And so going back to that, in terms of when you look in terms of how indigenous people view fine art, it wasn't even a word for fine art, because everything that we did was so much incorporated into it. So I think now, as we shift into this new era, understand when you're fashioning your body, how you paint your makeup, your hair, that's fine art. So own that, you know what I'm saying? However that means. So in terms of scaling up, the more that you scale up on yourself, your living space, you can scale up with your relationships to your people, because that's a curation, that's a fine art. Then it's gonna automatically translate to scale and institutions or whatever it is, because what you're essentially doing is understand, like, I am the prize, and even though this is my work, this is me, this is Jamia in this space, and I'm inviting you all into, y'all have a seat in my living room and just getting a, understanding of my thought process. So that's how I want to just take ownership in the micro, and it's going to automatically lead into the macro. Everything that you do, even with how you cook your food, how you catering, like, that's fine art. So if you do that, it's something in the universe that's going to keep opening things up for you, you know what I mean? And it just grows, so now you have a museum installation. So.
Well, thank you all for such a wonderful conversation. It's a really lovely way to ease our way into the end of Art Week. It really has been exciting for me to hear all of your perspectives. I do have to plug a program that we're going to be doing tomorrow. If you haven't gotten enough of Jamia's work, we are going to be doing a tour tomorrow, speaking to all of the work on view in a bit more detail. We also have another exhibition that traveled from El Museo about Juan Francisco Elso's life and his influence on many artists of Cuban descent and the diaspora. And the curators Olga Viso and Susanna Temkin will be here giving a tour of that as well. We also worked on a publication together for this exhibition, which for me, organizing shows is only one part of the art historical canon. And having a legacy of text is a really vital component. And so we worked on this fantastic publication that is hot off the presses and in the shop. We have the designer here today. Actually, Diana, I have to give you a shout out, because it was just really special for me to have a Black designer work on the book, but also all of the contributors were Black women. And it was a really intentional thing that I did. And I encourage you to check it out in our bookstore. And I just have to extend our gratitude again to Howard University for partnering with us for this program. It really is a special moment for us, and we appreciate you bringing the students here and coming here. I know this week is very busy for you, and so to come to MOCA, we really appreciate it. And thank you all for coming here and spending some time in our institution.